grandmother would tell a funny story about how, like, one day and I was fussing, and so then she would look down at me and, Kamala, what do you want? What do you want? And I looked back up at her and I said, freedom.
That is the funniest story ever told. Kamala Harris, a complete fabrication. It's actually a story of another little girl that happened during the Civil Rights Movement, not to her, but she went ahead and tried to co-opt the story. Isn't that cultural appropriation? Shouldn't she be canned or something like that? Like tuna? Womp, womp, womp. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know, Joe Biden is not the nicest person ever. Not by a long shot. And we've got some Joe Biden today. He's anti-Israel now because the Democrat Party is anti-Israel. And our news media and Amnesty International, they're supporting a murderous terrorist. They call him a writer. He's a writer? Well, he died now of cancer in prison because of the torture murder of the kidnapped Israeli. But Amnesty International calls him a writer, not a convicted murderer or torturer or any of that stuff. No, sir. Amnesty International, just a disgrace to its former self, sadly. Very sadly, I'm telling you. Now, the Twitter, you get that X thing? It's we used to call it Twitter. There's still tweets, but now they're on X. It's kind of a crazy thing when the Democrats say. A piece in Politico today, a Florida woman sentenced to a month in jail for selling Biden's daughter's diary. Everybody, enemies of the Biden family, they go to prison. And this woman found Ashley Biden left her diary in a halfway house where she was because of her drug abuse and sex addiction, drug abuse, all that stuff. And, you know, this diary that was left behind in the drug halfway house by Joe Biden's daughter, Ashley, was found by someone else who went to the same halfway house. And they said, hey, wait a minute, this is the diary of the daughter of the President of the United States revealing all kinds of terrible stuff. And so the FBI raided the home of James O'Keefe in the office of Project Veritas, where they thought the diary was, and rifles and body armor and goggles and all kinds of stuff like they're getting Al-Qaeda. Now it's just Joe Biden's daughter's diary, because Joe Biden's daughter in the diary talked about how dad used to shower with her when she was a teenager because he's a creep. And he's got all kinds of issues, smelling and sniffing and touching children and other people's wives. And don't forget Tara Reid, who worked for him on Capitol Hill as a Senate staffer until he sexually assaulted her with his hands and his fingers, pinning her against the wall. She has fled the United States of America out of fear because she's terrified by what has happened to the country. Now, this young woman sentenced to a month in jail for selling Joe Biden's daughter's diary. And, let's be clear. Greg Price on X says, to be clear, Joe Biden's daughter wrote in a diary that her dad took showers with her as a kid, as a teenager in reality, and questions if he molested her. Somebody found it, sold it to journalists. These journalists were raided by the feds. And Biden's Department of Justice put the person that found the diary in jail. That is the stuff of ooga booga third world countries. This is not the United States of America. And if we had a news media that would stand up for free press and holding the powerful accountable and the First Amendment to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, then we'd live in a much better country. But we don't have a legitimate press. We have an illegitimate press at this moment in time, and that is a terrible thing, but it's the reality that we must deal with. I am telling you. Now, let's go to this NPR story, because I mentioned it yesterday, but I did not get into it deeply. It kind of popped while we were on the air yesterday. Shared with me by my friend Marty, who said, hey, take a look at this NPR story. We were already on the air. The headline is, I've been at NPR for 25 years. Here's how we lost America's trust. And this is from the Free Press. It's THEFP.com. And this was stood up by a great former New York Times reporter who had to leave, Barry Weiss, because she wanted to report the news and the New York Times didn't. Now, he writes this story. His name is Yuri Berliner. People keep pronouncing his name in 9 different ways, Berliner. It's Berliner. It couldn't be more obvious. A veteran of public radio, NPR, says the network lost its way when it started telling listeners how to think. That much I shared with you yesterday. And Yuri Berliner wrote a lengthy piece on his experiences there. Says, you know, the stereotype of the NPR listener, an EV driving, electric vehicle driving, an EV driving, Wordle playing. Wordle is a little word game that people play, and Kamala Harris had a gaffe about Wordle yesterday that I hope to get to today as well. She said she misses, as vice president, not being able to play Wordle, which doesn't make any sense. And Wordle didn't come along until she was already vice president, so it doesn't make any sense again. But you know the stereotype of an NPR listener, an EV driving, Wordle playing, tote bag carrying, coastal elite. It doesn't precisely describe me. Yes, it does, but it's not far off. I'm a Sarah Lawrence educated, left-wing, ought to be a girls' college, was raised by a lesbian peace activist mother who wasn't, honestly. I drive a Subaru. All right, you are the stereotype, okay? And Spotify says my listening habits are most similar to people in Berkeley, California. My favorite part is the lesbian peace activist mother. Needs more details on that. So when I got a job here at NPR, he says, 25 years ago, I never looked back. If you're a left-wing journalist, then NPR is the bee's knees. They pay more than anybody else. They do less work than anybody else. They have 33 people working on a 3-hour radio show. We have 3.5 here on our 3-hour radio show. As a senior editor on the business desk, where news is always breaking, we covered upheavals in the workplace, supermarket prices, social media, and AI. It's true, NPR has always had a liberal bent, he says. But during most of my tenure here, an open-minded, curious culture prevailed. We were nerdy, but not knee-jerk activist or scolding. You need a little help seeing yourself from the outside sometimes. In recent years, however, that has changed. Today, those who listen to NPR or read its coverage online find something different. The distilled worldview of a very small segment of the U.S. population. If you are conservative, you will read this and say, duh, it's always been this way. But it hasn't, he says. Now he goes on at great length about, since NPR was founded in 1970 and America turned into NPR and you could listen to birds chirping in the Amazon. Back in 2011, although NPR's audience tilted a bit to the left, it still bore a resemblance to America at large. 26% of listeners describe themselves as conservatives, 23% as middle of the road, and 37% as liberal. By 2023, the picture was completely different. Only 11% described themselves as very or somewhat conservative, 21% as middle of the road, and 67% of listeners said they were very liberal or somewhat liberal. We weren't just losing conservatives, but also losing moderates and traditional liberals. Sure. Well, I'm sure that's true. And it's great that he took a look at the numbers. It honestly is. And he deserves all the credit in the world because he's going to be destroyed now or become the new chief of NPR, one or the other. But if he does become the new chief of NPR, he'll be hated by all the left-wing transgender liars beneath him, and they will be beneath him. All right, so let's go to Yuri Berliner. Let's go to soundbite number 8. Yuri Berliner did an interview with Bari Weiss, B-A-R-I Weiss, and she is also a hero of truth-telling because she had to flee the liars in order to tell the truth, and she went and started her own news outlet, which is just great, and that's where this man was able to publish his, it's called Free Press, and that's where this man was able to publish his work that will lead to the total destruction of his career and his life. But he'll probably be able to create a new life because if he wants to tell the truth, there are a lot of people out there that want to tell the truth too. I'm one of those people. Bari Weiss is one of those people. She was an op-ed book review editor at the Wall Street Journal, 2013, 2017, op-ed staff writer on culture and politics at the New York Times, 2017 to 2020. And then she had to leave because she wanted to do news and journalism, and it's really hard there. All right, let's go to Yuri Berliner talking to Bari Weiss on her podcast about NPR, National Panhandler Radio. You should know this because you pay for it.
I think like every newsroom, every legacy media newsroom, we were shocked, disturbed, distraught, really troubled. We assumed Hillary Clinton was going to win, and she didn't, and it was really an unsettling experience. But I also think, to me, it revealed that we didn't really understand a lot of what was going on in America, that we were out of touch.
Good for him. Discovering the obvious must have struck him in the forehead like a diamond bullet. Wait a minute, we're the ones who are out of touch? Wait, I'm the bad guy? Honestly. Yuri Berliner. And then Trump won. They were shocked. They couldn't believe it. We knew what was going to happen. We knew Hillary was going to win. They had their shoulder behind the effort in every big city and every small town in America with their taxpayer-funded Democrat Party propaganda network, which the Democrats really are overdue in defunding. Defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Screw Big Bird. Not literally Democrats. That's just a turn of phrase. Yuri Berliner on Trump winning.
After a while, we started covering Trump in a way that like a lot of the legacy news organizations, that we were trying to damage his presidency, to even find anything we could to harm him. And I think what we latched on to was Russia collusion, like a lot of news organizations, which was, as I write, sort of catnip, although it was just rumors and a lot of it based on pretty shoddy documents.
Yeah, fake reporting, Adam Schiffless being the biggest liar in Washington, D.C., and we started to damage his presidency, like other news organizations. How does an American president survive when the entire media apparatus, virtually, is out to destroy his presidency? And that's what they did, and President Trump was well aware of this, and Obama was spying on him and wiretapping him, and he was called a lunatic for saying it, and then he was one more thing that was proved to be true later on. Yuri Berliner. Our hero was Adam Schiff, but he lied about everything. He'd go into a classified briefing, come out and lie about what he learned in the classified briefing, and the news media gobbled it up like the lapdogs that they are.
We really latched on to Adam Schiff. He was like our muse to the Trump collusion story. We had him on constantly. And then the Mueller report came out, and no collusion. And, I think we sort of learned the story kind of disappeared.
Yeah. I've talked about this 100 times. When the story turns out to be completely wrong, they just stop talking about it. They don't correct it. They don't flog themselves. They don't say, oh, my God, we were wrong. We owe you all an apology. They just stop talking about it. And that's what he just described there. Do you know that Eden Pure right now is having their famous BOGO deal on the Eden Pure Thunderstorm Air Purifier? When you buy one thunderstorm, you get one thunderstorm for free. No matter how many you buy, you get an equal number for free. If you buy 2 Eden Pure thunderstorms, you get 2 for free. You see how this works. If you buy 7 Eden Pure thunderstorms, you get 7 for free. You can use them in the office, the teenager's room, in the kitchen, everywhere. Give them away to your uncle. Might need one. The thunderstorm will completely eliminate any odor, even the worst kinds of odors. You know, litter boxes and your mother-in-law's cooking. Even Michael Moore is no match for the Eden Pure thunderstorm because the O3 molecules in the Eden Pure thunderstorm seek out and destroy odors even behind and underneath furniture. Nothing can hide from the thunderstorm. And now is the time to order because it's Eden Pure's buy one, get one free sale for a limited time, as you might imagine. So don't wait. With thousands of 5-star reviews online, we've got 2 of them humming along at home right now. It works like a champ. People are buying several for around the home, even as gifts. Just go to EdenPureDeals.com on Al Gore's amazing internet and use the discount code ChrisBogo. That's buy one, get one. That's EdenPureDeals.com. The discount code is ChrisBogo. Yeah, so this guy is the new hero of journalism, Yuri Berliner, which means he's going to have to be destroyed. He's going to have an eye-opening experience, and I've got more of him for you and more to say about what he's doing here as well. Hey, it's Chris Plant, excited to tell you about our July 2024 Listener Sea Cruise. We'll be sailing around the British Isles, visiting Scotland and Ireland. Please join us. Visit ChrisPlantCruise.com. All right, we're going to get back to Yuri Berliner in just a moment with the rest of his insider story from NPR, which is just like every other fake news organization in the United States of America, and I will share the rest of that with you and flesh it out going forward. Right now, let's go to the telephones. I see that a nice woman has a bone to pick with me. Let's go to Sarah, calling from Toledo, Ohio. Sarah, you're on the Chris Plant Show.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Sarah.
I love your show.
Thank you.
I love your show, but I have a rare bone to pick with you.
Okay.
And I don't like the fact that you're making fun of the people who cried during the eclipse, assuming that they were all Democrats. Because trust me, I love mocking leftist tears, but this was really different. It was really different. I'm a staunch conservative, so and my conservative kids, it brought tears to their eyes too. So just wanted to mention that.
All right. I'm glad that you called in because I did make a little bit of fun of that yesterday. It was on the front page of the Washington Post that there were tears for the eclipse, and I'm like, tears for the eclipse? What's up with that? Now I'm running out the clock on myself, but can you sum up why did you shed a tear?
Well, on its way to totality, we were putting our glasses on every couple minutes, which was interesting. But at full totality, when you could take your glasses off, it was really an emotional, spiritual experience. It's one of those things maybe you had to be there to understand it, but it really was. It did move me to tears.
Well, I like you call it spiritual, and okay. I'll stop making fun. Now, again, this 25-year NPR employee who rose to a senior position and has blown the whistle on these people by way of Barry Weiss's website, The Free Press. And it is a remarkable story, I've got to say, and it's absurd that this is considered to be brave, but in today's left-wing radical world, Democrat Party world where people are punished for telling the truth and lies are rewarded with lucite blocks and golden statuettes, and they shower you with money, and you get a 1-hour show at MSNBC. But this remarkable Yuri Berliner writes in his piece on Free Press, says, at NPR, they brought in a new left-wing boss, and a white liberal left-wing boss. And suddenly everything had to be about race with the new left-wing boss, right? Talks about, George Floyd and what a big deal that was. Trump became president and they were all in a panic. And it's not hard to understand why when you read the rest of the article by Yuri Berliner. He writes, race and identity became paramount in nearly every aspect of the workplace. Journalists were required to ask everyone we interviewed their race, gender, and ethnicity, among other questions. You can't tell if it's a man or a woman. You have to ask their gender because you're doing an interview with NPR and they want to know what your gender is, and your race because they're racists. They're going to be lynching people from trees again, the Democrats are. So every reporter, every interview required to ask the interview subject their race, their gender, their ethnicity, among other questions, and had to enter all of this information into a centralized tracking system. Centralized tracking system, very Maoist. We were given unconscious bias training sessions, a growing DEI staff. They have a diversity, equity, inclusion staff. We're paying for it. A growing DEI staff offered regular meetings imploring us to start talking about race. Start talking about race. That's a good idea. Then go and burn a police car and loot the CVS. Monthly dialogues were offered for women of color, men of color, non-binary people of color were included too. These initiatives, bolstered by a $1 million grant from the NPR Foundation. Michael, for how long do you think it will take the company to spend $1 million on producing our radio show? 1 million years. I think 1 million years. These initiatives bolstered by a $1 million grant from the NPR Foundation, suckling on the taxpayer teat, came from management, from the top down. Amazing stuff. Crucially, they were in sync with what was happening at the grassroots among producers, reporters, other staff members, because they've filled the pond with recent college graduates who have all been indoctrinated with the Maoist way of life. Most visible was a burgeoning number of employee resource or affinity groups. They have affinity groups at NPR based on identity. Now, listen to this. They included Mijipoc, M-G-I-P-O-C, and that's what they call Mijipoc. Marginalized genders and intersex people of color mentorship program. I'm sorry, what? Marginalized genders? Which genders are marginalized? Why don't you promote a woman? All right, mission accomplished. Dust your hands off. Get on with things. The marginalized genders and intersex people of color mentor. So wait a minute. If you're a marginalized gender, intersex white person, you're not invited to go because you're not a people of color. That's your Democrat Party. They're amazing. There's an unspoken consensus, he writes, about the stories we should pursue and how they should be framed. It's frictionless, meaning there's no resistance at all, no friction at all. It's frictionless. One story after another about instances of supposed racism, transphobia, signs of the climate apocalypse, Israel doing something bad, and the dire threat of Republican policies. It's almost like an assembly line. Now, you see, that sentence should be read on the floor of the House of Representatives when they introduce the Defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting legislation that is decades overdue. It is way past time that the taxpayers stop funding this Democrat Party propaganda network that they've set up very effectively across the country. Amazing stuff. The mindset prevails in choices about language in a document called NPR Transgender Coverage Guidance, disseminated by News Management. We're asked to avoid the term biological sex. Don't use the term biological sex because there is no biological sex. Democrats are whatever gender they want to be. They morph when they snap their fingers from one gender to another. Amazing stuff. The editorial guidance was prepared with the help of former staffer from the National Center for Transgender Equality. The mindset animates bizarre stories on how the Beatles and bird names are racially problematic. Sure. the names of birds and the Beatles, the band. They make music. It's racially problematic. Others are alarmingly divisive, justifying looting. Well, the Democrats all justify looting with claims that fears about crime are racist. Sure. Never mind the fact that, according to the Washington Post, African Americans shoot and kill people at a rate more than 10 times as high as white people, but pay no attention to that. The Washington Post stopped reporting that. They did it for a while, then they decided they had to not do that anymore for the same set of reasons, by the way, and suggests that Asian Americans who oppose affirmative action have been manipulated by white conservatives. So white conservatives are the problem. Let's get back to Yuri Berliner. Kind of a fun name, right? And he went on again with a sane and rational reporter, Barry Weiss, on her podcast, formerly of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and he revealed the truth about NPR. And it's time that we stopped funding this. And I'm tired of Republicans doing nothing about everything. You got to start fighting the fight, boys and girls. Let's go to soundbite number 11, Yuri Berliner, talking about how whatever it is the left is doing, if they're rioting in favor of Hamas in the streets of America, then, they're pro-Hamas. NPR's pro-Hamas. Anti-Jewish, anti-Semites, anti-Israel, racists, anti-Semites. Then you go with that, Yuri Berliner.
It's a pretty big thing to say that America is infected with systemic racism. That's a big deal to say that. That would be a great starting point for reporting, looking for evidence, figuring out, is this true? Is it not true? Is it to what extent? But I think sort of a tone had been set instead.
A tone had been set. America, you just accept whatever the left says. America is a terribly racist country. We're the least racist country on the planet Earth. Show me a less racist country than the United States of America, and I'll give you $1. Such a country does not exist. We are the most culturally mixed, ethnically mixed, racially mixed. We have created the circumstances for the most successful African Americans, the most successful people of African descent in the world are in the United States of America. Yes, the British inflicted slavery upon us. And in 1776, we threw out the British. In 1777, we started throwing out slavery, banning it in Vermont, the first state to ban slavery months after the American Revolution. Started dismantling the whole system, and way ahead of everybody else around the world, just by the way. And the Europeans bought their African slaves from other Africans who were capturing Africans and selling them as slaves. Maybe some reparations from the Africans. What do you think? So there it is. And no, America is systemically racist. So just do stories that reinforce that false notion. And that's because their boy, Joseph Goebbels, of the Socialist Workers' Party of Adolf Hitler, said a lie told once remains a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth.
Did I hear you correctly say that perhaps he was influenced by Goebbels?
Could have been Goebbels. Might have been Goebbels. Yuri Berliner, talking about working there, he said, I decided I was going to check the political affiliation of all of my coworkers at NPR in Washington, and you'll never guess what he found.
At one point, I got so frustrated with what I saw was the sort of the lack of different perspectives in our coverage that I decided to look at voter registration among our staff. And what I found was 87 registered Democrats on our editorial staff, 0 Republicans. I presented this at a all hands or a large news meeting, and I said, hey, look, something's gone wrong here.
No, that's not the way they look at it. That's not something has gone wrong. I'm glad that you view it that way because, legitimate journalism is vital to the proper function of our republic, and our republic is not functioning properly right now. And a huge part of that, the blame belongs to the American news media, which is the filthy, corrupt institution that it has become. So he decided to look in the D.C. Bureau, the Washington Bureau for NPR, which is where NPR is headquartered. It's where all the big bosses are. And he says, where many of us live, I found 87 registered Democrats working in editorial positions and 0 Republicans, none. He took it to what they call an all-hands meeting. Everybody in the office shows up for the big meeting. Took it to the all-hands meeting and said, hey, I think we've got a problem here. We've got 87 registered Democrats in editorial positions and 0 Republicans. And he said the response wasn't hostile. It was worse. I was met with profound indifference. I got a few messages from surprised, curious colleagues, but the messages were of the, oh, wow, that's weird variety. And then, of course, nothing was done about it. The lopsided tally of 87-0. The only diversity that matters, I've been talking about this since the day I started doing radio, having left CNN and grown up in a media household, said the only diversity that matters in a newsroom is viewpoint diversity, ideological, political diversity. Racial diversity doesn't matter in a newsroom. Now, I know you want to have black people covering black stories, which they started doing 50 years ago in newsrooms, and that's fine. But the only diversity that matters is viewpoint diversity. And here's the macro problem here. What Yuri Berliner is revealing here is not unique to NPR. You would find the same thing in every Washington and New York news headquarters, networks, newspapers, even the entertainment media. Go to Stephen Colbert's staff. It's all left-wing propaganda, and they're killing the country. That's the only problem. Yuri Berliner talking to Barry Weiss. This is our last soundbite, but I got to say, 87-0 in the ideological count, editorial position. He didn't ask the janitor, who the janitor voted for. Might be the only Trump voter in the place, but they would spit on that janitor regardless. And they claim it's very diverse because everybody's gay and most people aren't white. Look how diverse we are. That's not diversity. That's racism, and you got some weird sexual issues, but never mind that. Yuri Berliner saying, gosh, I remember when we used to think that journalists had an obligation, a duty of some kind.
I think we have a particular obligation to reflect America, to understand people from all different outlooks, to bring up things that might be uncomfortable for our progressive audience members, to be a little more daring, to take a little more chance, to be more curious about things that don't fit the narrative.
The narrative. Curious about things that don't fit. If that meant being transgender and marrying a rabbit, then they'd be all in favor of that. But if you're talking about having somebody that didn't vote the same way as you did in an editorial position in the newsroom, that's where you cross the line, my friend. And it is. And I again, day one, when I started doing radio, I was talking about viewpoint diversity in newsrooms, because I always make fun of they talk about diversity, and the only thing that they are referring to is race and who you have sex with. But those ought to be less important in newsrooms than your worldview. Just saying. And this is perfectly emblematic and representative of what's going on in every newsroom in Washington and New York, and almost all of them across the country. Almost everybody has an IRS story, and they rarely end well. Am I right? This is an urgent message. If you still owe the IRS $10,000 or more, the IRS recently announced increased collection activity, hiring more people to go after you, for 2023 taxes, especially with the tax deadline looming large right now. That means that the IRS is coming out with aggressive new tactics, with liens and levies and wage garnishments just around the corner if you owe them money or if you have not yet filed your taxes. With former IRS tax attorneys and expert tax professionals, Legal Tax Defense is gearing up right now for this activity to help protect you from the IRS. Call them today. Don't procrastinate. Call 800-472-0467 and take advantage of tax reliefs programs like the Fresh Start program. For more than 10 years now, Legal Tax Defense has helped taxpayers just like you save millions of dollars in back taxes owed. So call them now. Call them right now and get qualified for your tax relief options and put an end to your tax problems today. Stop worrying. Stop staying up at night. Don't be a victim of the IRS. Call the experts at Legal Tax Defense right now. 800-472-0467. That's 800-472-0467. Online at LegalTaxDefense.com. Ah, yes, the IRS. Yeah, so good for this guy. One honest journalist has come forward. It's like Pound Me Too. Do you think other journalists will start coming out of the woodwork? I suspect the answer is no, at least very unlikely, because they know that they'd have to sacrifice their careers on the altar, the blood-drenched altar of the left. Their ideology must reign supreme. I don't think you're going to see it. Maybe some retired people may come forward. I'm here to I've been telling the same story since I left CNN all those years ago. I got a lot more. NPR responded angrily to the story coming up. Right now, I want to head to the phones, and let's go to Jim, calling from Kansas City, Missouri. Jimmy, you're on the Chris Plante Show.
Hey, Chris. Good morning. How are you?
Very well, Jim. Thank you very much.
Well, I wanted to give my perspective as someone who was an editor on NPR's Morning Edition program in the 1990s. Yeah. And that perspective is that, while I appreciate Mr. Berliner coming forward, this is not really all that new, and I think we all knew that too. A couple quick examples. I know you're kind of running up on the clock, but I was an editor during Rodney King. And after the Rodney King episode, we had one story after another, some of them very dubious, about alleged police brutality, and I pushed back and I got chastised for that. It was also, do you remember the name Kimberly Bergalis? Does that name ring a bell?
Only vaguely.
She was the young woman who contracted AIDS from her dentist. And there was a story that was written, and I was the editor, and I let it go. The lead to the story was, infants. It was about babies who are born with AIDS have been called the innocent victims of AIDS. And I got chastised for that. I said, there are no guilty people in AIDS. And I said, well, wait a minute. A baby is a little different from a person having unprotected.
Jim, can I ask you to hang in there? If you can hang in through the news break, I'd like to let you continue.